to get back to the GM story, which is, of course, one of the most serious stories on the docket today. We were talking earlier to Carl Tobias, who is an expert on the kind of payouts that liability payouts that GM may be making. But let's talk about the victims in this case and what to make of what GM has done. Jere Beasley joins us, founding shareholder and personal injury attorney at Jere Beasley Law. Good to talk to you. How are you?
Doing great. How are you?
I'm doing fine. I don't know. What do you make of this? Even if it did not go all the way to the top, it seems hard to believe that all of these things happened at GM, that a number of people knew there was a fault with these vehicles, a fault that could be fatal, didn't tell anybody at whatever level that happens at. Isn't that a cover-up?
Well, anybody that believes that this could happen over a period of 10 years at a major manufacturer of automobiles and the top people not know about it, that's absurd. In fact, nobody should believe that. It can't happen in a large corporation of this sort. And the fact that they actually did things that, for example, when they changed over to the very cheap change from the old to the new on the ignition switch, they use the same parts number. And that's absolutely unheard of in engineering. You always change parts number. They did it because they wanted to hide the defect. And they were getting reports of deaths. For example, the Melton case, our case in Atlanta, Georgia, the case with Lance Cooper, that death is not even included in General Motors' count. There have been hundreds of deaths caused by this defect. And
so you're not buying the number 13 even?
No, in fact, actually General Motors has now admitted that there are more. And I suspect by the time this is all over, it will be in the hundreds, because you can't have this many vehicles out there over that period of time with a defect that is a safety defect that causes collisions and not have serious injuries and deaths. In fact, we've talked to enough families of victims to know that we've talked enough to know that it's in the hundreds.
Let's explain, because it's a very, very important point that you made. When they changed the part that was causing the problem and they went to a different part, as you said, they kept the same part number, which they never do. And I agree with you, that reeks of cover-up. Sure.
That's a dead giveaway, because they did not want anybody to find out about it, anybody including their own customers, but importantly, they didn't want the government to know. And the government has some responsibility here, but remember that NHTSA, the agency that has the regulatory authority, they're underfunded, understaffed, and if they get good folks working for them, guess where they wind up going? They go straight to the automobile industry.
Yeah, that happens in our industry too. I mean, people from the industry go to the FCC and then they go back into the industry where they are rewarded for the way they voted. In 2006, when they made that change in the defective switch, they knew they were making that change, didn't they? Because there were millions of defective switches out there. And that's 2006. Last time I looked at my calendar, it's 2014, and nothing was said back then.
That's right. In fact, the law requires them to report a safety defect within 5 days after discovery. So here, they first knew about it during the planning stage, during the design stage. That was in 2001. They put the cobalt in production 2004. They started getting death reports. And those death reports were never turned over to the government. And we've seen this happen in the Toyota case. We've seen it in other cases. We've seen it in General Motors before. In fact, they had what was called a silent recall, where they had a stalling problem back years ago. They didn't report that to the government. And they would tell the dealers that if a person comes in with a stalling problem, fix the problem. It was a computer chip problem then. Fix the problem and try to get the customer to pay, and if they don't pay, we pay. But they call that a silent recall, and they never told the government.
Wow.
They had another program called the 2500 program, and we found out after years of them misleading in depositions other lawyers, we found out in a case called the Jernigan case that $2,500 represented $2,500 worth of mass taken out of the vehicle, mass being weight, weight being steel. And they were actually reducing the strength of the steel. They were cutting the safety, what they call the side frames, cut them off almost halfway of the vehicle length. And they got away with this for years. And we tried a case, proved it, and they wound up settling the case. And, of course, they try to keep everything confidential. And fortunately, we were able to alert folks about that. But we've seen this over and over and over again. And the public, if the public knew what we know about the automobile industry, they would be outraged.
I could maybe buy GM's claim that keeping the same part number when they switched out the bad part for a good part was just incompetence, as Mary Barra is saying, if that ever happened on any change in a part where people weren't dying. Except there doesn't seem to be any evidence of that. It's incompetence that only amazingly happens here.
Well, you know, if you've got incompetent people designing your vehicles, and you've got some real serious problems out there. In fact, I was talking on an interview this morning, and that question was asked, and I said, look, if they've got incompetent people designing various parts of an automobile, safety features, then heaven help us, because we've got other vehicles out there, obviously, that could have the same type problems or even worse problems. In fact, we had a case today where the airbag in a car actually exploded on a very low, an impact that should not have even triggered the airbags. This was nothing to do with this case, but the airbags actually exploded in that car and blew the top of the steering wheel completely off. And maybe that type of incompetence breeds this type thing. And I would hate to know that a company at the top tells the public that for 10 years we've had incompetent people designing automobiles that we claim to be safe.
One of the things that bothers me on top of the people dying, there's a case, Mikhail Erickson, father of two young kids who died, 10 years ago, while riding in a Saturn Ion. The car went off the road. His fiancée, Candace, was driving at the time. No skid marks, no obvious cause. The airbags did not deploy. Anderson was thrown through the windshield. She survived, though barely. She had trace amounts of anti-anxiety medication in her system, but no other drugs, no alcohol. She was charged with manslaughter and pleaded guilty to criminal negligent homicide because the prosecutors said, look, just that little trace amount of anti-anxiety medication in your system, that proves that you really caused this. So she's now a convicted felon living in a small town in Texas, Canton, Texas, where everybody knows she's a convicted felon. And just days ago, Anderson learned that Mikhail's death was one of the 13 that GM has admitted was caused not by anything she did, but by a faulty ignition switch. This is somebody who pleaded out to a felony.
You could probably multiply that, I suspect, by a great number, because most of the investigating officers, if you had, for example, the Melton case, they initially charged her, the deceased 29-year-old nurse, they charged her with being the responsible party. And fortunately, when they came seeking legal advice, not to sue anybody, but simply to clear their daughter's name, an expert that was hired got into the case, and we actually took the ignition switch and had it examined, and this expert found the problem very easily. In fact, he said this is absolutely, he couldn't believe it, that a company would not have found that problem just as easy as he had.
All right. We'll stay on top of this. Jere, I thank you for spending the time. I hope we can stay in touch as these cases go along. Thanks for being with us.
Let me mention one thing to you.
Yeah, sure.
There are things called statutes of limitation where you can't sue after a certain period of time has expired after an accident. Mm-hmm. I would encourage anybody, for example, the person you just mentioned, regardless of when an accident occurred, regardless of the time, that person should contact a local lawyer and seek legal advice, because I suspect that General Motors is going to have to honor those claims because they withheld the information from the public, from the government.
Mm-hmm.
They've lied under oath in depositions. So people who might not think that their claim is still alive or has validity ought to talk to a lawyer and find out if, in fact, they should go forward.
Interesting. All right, Jere, thanks for being with us.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
You got it. Jere Beasley, founding shareholder and personal injury attorney.